On June 24, 1967, 10 cavers entered the Mossdale Caverns of Yorkshire, England, to discover a new passage using explosives. Unfortunately, 6 of them would face their worst nightmares when they got trapped deep within a 900-foot tunnel. With water rising fast, air growing thin, and no escape in sight, their chance of survival was quickly lost. This is the tragic story of the Mossdale Caverns disaster, one of the most haunting and tragic incidents in British caving history. On Saturday, June 24, 1967, a group of 10 cavers, members of 3 caving clubs, including the Leeds University Union Speleological Society, set out to explore the Mossdale Caverns. Among them were 26-year-old Dave Adamson and the recently married 24-year-old Jeff Boyro, 2 skilled and respected cavers who had already made trips to Mossdale. The group included both seasoned and passionate young adventurers who shared a love for the underground world. On the morning of that fateful day, the 10 cavers had agreed to meet at Café Royale in Grassington Main Square. Here, they went through their plan to enter the cave that day. Dave and Jeff had a plan and were excited about it. They were going to be the first to map new paths in one of Britain's biggest and deepest caves. They intended to go with explosives to blast off the Mini Cow Passage in the cavern. This was at the southern end of the caverns. Among them were 21-year-olds John Shepard and Jim Cunningham, who had seen the weather forecast of the day previously. They were concerned. While the weather of June had been mostly dry, that day promised to be overcast with storms, especially late in the afternoon. The pair had called to the attention of Dave of the horrible forecast, but he assured them that they could handle it. This, he said, was because there was a safe place within the chasm where they could all hide when the cavern started flooding. But Shepard and Cunningham still felt uneasy. However, they didn't want to seem like the ones who chickened out of a possible massive discovery. But before they agreed to follow Dave and others, the only 2 women in the group, 19-year-old Colette Lord and 22-year-old Morag Forbes, said they couldn't go that far. Their reason was logical. They hadn't come with a wetsuit like the others. Plus, they were not experienced cavers. Morag was to be married to Dave Adamson in the coming month and likely came along because of her fiancé. Along with Colette, Morag had insisted on exploring the cave to a safe point known as Rough Passage. The weather forecast still posed a threat. The 10 cavers were then split into 2 groups, one with 6 guys including Jeff, Dave, 19-year-old William Fracas, 21-year-old John Ogden, 23-year-old Colin Vickers, and a 17-year-old Michael Ryan, a first-time caver and the youngest. With that settled, they all left for the Mossdale Cave System. Discovered by Bob Leakey in 1941, the Mossdale Caverns in the Yorkshire Dales National Park were known as one of Britain's most challenging and extensive cave systems. These caves had earned a reputation for their narrow tunnels, underground streams, and unpredictable water levels. When the 10 cavers got to the entrance of the caves, the 6-man group entered first as planned. It was going to take hours before they reached their destination, so it was expected that they wouldn't be back until midnight. As for the other 4 cavers, they started their descent a while later. The 4-man group spent a few hours reaching the rough passage as planned, stayed in the small room there a little while, and then elected to exit the cave. As they crawled and walked their way out, they started hearing noise, like footsteps. At first, they had thought it was the 6-man group finally returning, but when they saw droplets of water falling into the caverns, they knew it had started to rain. As expected, Morag was worried for her fiancé, but she was reassured by what Dave had told them about a safe place to hide if the flood came. So they exited the cave, hoping for the best. When they reached the cave's entrance, the rain was falling softly, still nothing to worry about. Knowing that Dave and his crew would still be a while, 3 from the 4-man group decided to leave the area for other personal business. only Morag chose to stay close by at the How Gill hut to wait for her fiancé. Inside the cave, the 6 remaining cavers had descended several hundred feet past the rough passage and down the knee wrecker. After a long and tight crawl down the notorious Marathon Passage, they came face to face with an even more menacing passage, the Far Marathon Passage. This tunnel is one of Mossdale's most grueling sections, which stretches about 900 feet. The passage was extremely narrow, so narrow that crawling through it was like trying to fit yourself into a small backpack. Meanwhile, outside, the rain was intensifying. Worried, Morag went back to the cave's entrance to see if her fiancé had resurfaced with the others. She shivered as she discovered with anxiety that Dave and the others hadn't. Underground, the team had previously noticed the water levels rising slightly, but assumed it was manageable. With their expertise, they trusted Dave to guide them safely if needed. What they didn't know was just how fast the water was rising. By 9 p.m., Morag returned to the cave's entrance one last time, and her heart sank. What had been a clear entryway was now completely submerged under a lake of water. Desperate, she ran to call for help. Rescuers began mobilizing, but underground, the 6 men were already fighting against the flood. The water flow had become terrifying. Unfortunately, the 6 cavers couldn't retreat. The Far Marathon didn't allow any turn at all. They had 2 options: to crawl ahead fast towards the end of the passage, or to crawl backward against the current. None of these was an easy option. In fact, it was growing impossible as the water flow grew forceful. Worse, the water was so cold that their hands were starting to freeze. The water was also hitting hard against their face, straining breathing. Even as they tried to find pockets of air, they couldn't. The water was everywhere. Every little space that their bodies didn't fill was covered with an angry rush of water. But things were getting worse, because as the rain grew heavier, the water within the cave was forcing them through the tight tunnel. They were choking from the water filling their mouths and nostrils, and from the pressure on their bodies against the tight walls. Far Marathon had become an inescapable trap. Outside, a massive rescue operation was underway. The Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Team, Cave Rescue Organization, and other helpful rescue teams had arrived. Cunningham and Shepard, who had been drinking beer at a pub, were also phoned and in no time had arrived. They were in shock, to say the least. Many who saw the cave already underwater felt it was already too late for the 6 cavers, but everybody held on to hope. By morning, hundreds of volunteers were present, working tirelessly, using pumps and makeshift dams to drain water from the cave entrance. There was still hope that the men had found an air pocket in one of Mossdale's chambers. By Sunday afternoon, nearly 24 hours later, rescuers finally gained access to Far Marathon. They called out, their voices echoing through the flooded tunnels, praying for a response. Instead, they made a grim discovery: the lifeless bodies of Jeff and Michael Ryan. The 2 had managed to lift themselves into a ridge along the path, desperately seeking the last precious breaths of air. As rescuers continued their search, they found 3 more bodies. John Ogden's was still missing. The rescuers hoped that, being an experienced caver, John might have found his way to a safe path, but this wasn't the case. It would take another 2 days to locate his body. All 6 men had drowned in the sudden flash flood, trapped in a passage that offered no escape. Their deaths were a devastating blow to the caving community. Mossdale Caverns was immediately closed to the public and declared a final resting place for the 6 men. However, in 1970, a group of cavers' friends re-entered the system to move the bodies to an upper chamber. This space was renamed the Sanctuary, a somber tribute to the bravery and tragic loss of the 6 men who perished in one of the most harrowing caving disasters in history. If you found this story gripping and would like to hear more about daring explorations, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let us know in the comments what you think of this story and if there are other tales you want us to uncover.